This is Chapter 3, First Flight. Faster and faster they rocketed along a strand of light, up toward a thick cluster of threads. Looking down, Rory saw a glowing track beneath them, like they were on a moving sidewalk of light, going at an enormous speed. What happened to the Earth? James sounded nervous. "Hold tight to the stone," shouted Belecha. "You'll see." All around, shimmering clouds billowed. Occasionally there were small points of light in the distance. Once or twice a large sphere glowed far above them as they whisked by. "We're going to drop down," yelled Belecha. "You'll feel a jerk and then a fast fall. Hold tight. There'll be a small bump when we get there." Rory squeezed the ring. The others did the same. "Now!" shouted Belecha. A plunge, then with a bump, they were sitting as they had started around the stone, now small again, on sandy ground. Nearby, the end of a wooden ladder poked up through a rough dome rising 3 feet above the ground level. A few cottonwood trees to the west showed where a river wound through the desert landscape. "This doesn't look much different than home," said James with some relief. Rory spoke up. "But it's day. When we left, it was night, and the moon was up. Cold star Techta. I figured you'd rather be able to look around, so I aimed for early morning. Didn't want it to be too late in the day. It might be too hot for you pale faces." James looked at him. "Who you calling a pale face?" Adima looked around, then turned to Belecha. "Okay, that was some ride. Now, why don't you tell us where we are and why?" Belecha looked down at her. "You've always focused on the issue at hand, Heliotone." "What do you mean? I've never met you before." "You know that. And let's handle your first question. That's the easiest." He glanced at Billy, who was looking around suspiciously. "Dinglin, you aren't as stupid as you look. Where are we?" Billy glared at him. "I'll give you a hint. You've been here lots of times. Broken a few windows. Ignore the road and buildings." James said there are no road or buildings, or anything except that dome. "Is it covering a hole?" Belecha nodded. "It's a kiva bigger than yours, and has the covering in place. Kivas are best with a top for a lot of reasons. I don't mean imagine here with no roads. I mean imagine the places you're used to without the stuff folks have built in the last 100 years or so." Billy squinted his eyes, looking around, then it hit him. "This is where Rattlesnake Ranch is." "You mean the place where the guy wants to build a mini-mart?" asked Rory. Billy nodded. "Yep, great place to mess around. No one minds if you cause a little damage." James was confused and looked a little panicked. "I've been here lots of times since I was a kid. The road runs right in front. Where is it? How did you make everything disappear?" "Our house is just a half-mile that way." He pointed toward the river. "I should see it from here. Why don't I see it?" Adima was fascinated. "Where are the power lines? And listen, no sound of the freeway. You can always hear it in the distance." They turned to Belecha. He grinned. "You're right. That's the answer to where you are. But you should have asked when you are. It's before your calendar was invented, but we're about 5,000 years in your past." Rory was too stunned to speak, but Adima was not thrown. She looked around, nodded as if this made perfect sense, then turned back to Belecha. "The question still remains. Why?" "To show you, we have to go into the kiva." "You have your show hidden in there?" asked Billy. Belecha looked at him and smiled. "Not to pull a trick like you think, but yeah, we need to be in the kiva for you to see this." "How come?" asked Billy. "Focus," answered Belecha. "A kiva focuses energy." "You called our pit a kiva," said Rory. Belecha nodded. "That's right. What you call a pit is actually a kiva, or the beginning of one. Think of it like a lens. If you grind a piece of glass right, it can focus rays of light. If you hold it near something small, that small thing will look big, like a magnifying glass. You aim at something far away, then you can look close, like a telescope. You with me so far?" They all nodded. "Well, a kiva focuses energy, not images. It allows you to see things you couldn't see without it. You can tune your kiva like you can grind a lens." "How?" asked Rory. "If you use it right, it keeps getting better." James appreciated quality tools. "Are you saying that this is a good kiva?" Belecha nodded. "The difference between this and the hole you kids dug is the difference between a science kit telescope and something at an observatory. It's the same basic thing, but this one works better." "Well, that makes sense," said Billy. "Okay, how do we get in?" "Just a minute, Hotshot. You're about to step into my parlor. Not many people have ever been invited in, so a few rules. First, I know it's a challenge, but you need to put a cork in your pie hole. All of you. If you have to ask a question or make a comment, think about it. Every single thing you say in the place affects it. Billy looked thoughtful, then nodded. You got it. I'll wait till we're out to tell you what I think. As if I cared, Tinglin. Adima poked Billy in the side. We'll keep quiet. Good. Second, don't try to explain what you see. Lots of it won't make sense. Let it be. Analyzing puts a wall between it and you. Don't. Dive in. You got questions? Ask later. Got it? They looked at each other and nodded. Last one. Before we go in, take a few breaths and focus. You need to be in the proper frame of mind. Messy minds are like walking into a clean house with mud on your shoes. Rory closed his eyes and tried to set aside all his questions and worry. After a couple of minutes, he opened his eyes and looked at the others, then at Belecha. Belecha looked closely at them and nodded. Good. Not so grubby. I'll go down first and light the fire. Belecha led them to the ladder, climbed down, and soon they saw flames flickering. He called up, "One at a time. Don't hurry. You're doing more than just climbing into a hole, so pay attention." They hesitated, not sure who should go first. Finally, Billy stepped forward and started down. Before his head disappeared, he grinned and saluted. Then he was gone. Adima went next. She didn't look at the others, choosing to look up at the sky as she climbed down. James hung back, but Rory pushed him toward the ladder. He didn't want James to have second thoughts up here alone. James grimaced and went down. Finally, Rory started down. As he stepped onto the ladder, Rory felt a vibration coming up through the wood. The ladder was an old-fashioned thing with rough branches lashed between two thicker poles. The uprights had been worn smooth from thousands of hands passing over them. In spite of the fire below, it was dark, and Rory had to feel his way, reaching down each time with his foot to find the next rung. The vibration made it feel like he was climbing down into an enormous, throbbing engine. From below, he heard Belecha chanting and beating a small drum. It seemed like Belecha was introducing him to the place. The drumming and chanting buzzed in his ears, mixing with the vibration of the ladder as he reached down with one foot, then the other, again and again. His reaching foot finally felt sand, and he stepped off the ladder and faced the others, the flickering light dancing across their faces. The kiva was dark and cool. A single, round, open space about 21 feet across, with a few cubby holes dug into the walls. The walls were smooth, as if they had been plastered, and in the dim light, Rory could see several large glyphs, including the 4 from their stone, painted on the walls. The domed roof was about 15 foot high in the center, coming down to about 12 foot along the walls. Belecha sat on a large flat rock that rose several inches higher than the ground, a rough-cut wooden drum with a painted hide head lying on the rock in front of him. A rattle covered with patterns of lines and more glyphs lay beside the drum. The fire was behind him, casting shadows that danced on the walls. To Rory, it seemed the shadows were moving with the rhythm of the drum. He noticed the fire was under the opening, so the smoke rose from it out to the sky. A low wall behind the ladder had several pots and baskets carefully stacked behind it. Belecha stopped drumming and pointed at a place on the wall in front of him. "Sit," he ordered. The 4 looked at each other, then followed his order, sitting on the sand floor. Rory stared at Belecha. Gone was the wisecracking trickster. This was an old grandfather who held the wisdom of the ages. "You are more than bones and the skin you see in the mirror. You have each decided to come to this world at this time because at this moment a very old mistake can be set right. To understand what I am saying, you must see the energy world that supports the world you know. Don't try to make sense. Seeing will be enough for now." Rory sneaked Belecha pulled out a small pouch. From it he poured a handful of powder that he threw into the fire. A small glowing ball of smoke formed and slowly rose. Instead of moving up and out the opening, the ball moved to the center of the roof, directly above Belecha. Rory sneaked a glance at the others. Adima was looking up at the smoke, her eyes shining with a calm smile on her face. James was looking around the kiva, trying to find a source of the smoke's glow. Billy was staring at Belecha, watching for any tricks. Rory looked at Belecha, who nodded at him and gestured with his chin to the smoke. "Story's up there. Tinglin will be along soon." He grinned at Billy. "He would never believe it if he didn't watch me until everyone else sees. So we'll open it up and wait for him." Rory nodded and looked toward the smoke. Belecha spoke in a deep, vibrating voice. "You see the world of sticks and stones and think that's all. You know it's not, but you can't see anything else. The world of energy is here all the time, but your brain refuses to register it. In your life, there is enough to distract you. Plenty of noise and excitement, plus you have the crowd of voices inside your head. Now, let's see what you've been missing." Belecha clapped his hands 3 times. The sound filled the kiva and left their ears ringing. With a third clap, the ball of smoke quickly spread across the curved ceiling of the kiva and began to glow more brightly. As Rory watched, he saw that the smoke itself was not glowing, but that inside the ball were light threads like the ones they had seen on their way here. The sound from the clap made the air vibrate, and the vibrations were growing. Rory felt them in the ground and the wall he was leaning against. As it grew, the threads began to pulse with the sound. The threads aligned themselves, crisscrossing to form a web. It seemed that the web was expanding up and out. Rory knew he should be able to see the ceiling in the light the web was giving off, but he could not. The ceiling had vanished into a vast dome of stars, and beyond them glowing spheres, and through it all spun the web of light. Rory turned to the others to see if they saw the same thing, and he gasped. They were wrapped in threads of shimmering light that streamed out from their bodies, then up and around the walls and into the web that floated above. "Can you move?" he whispered. Adima looked at him, grinning broadly. But look." She slowly waved her hand in front of her body, moving like she was underwater, and as if it were underwater, the air shimmered and moved with her motion. From her arms, threads shot out and up the walls. "Try it." Rory moved his arm and was amazed to see the same lights coming from his arm and hand. James, who was slowly waving his hand in front of his face, said, "I can't understand how—" "Pechame," said Belecha sharply to James. "Let it rest. Think later. Feel now." Rory looked at Belecha and his mouth dropped open. The old man was hardly recognizable as human. He was shimmering points of light wrapped in glowing threads. Rory looked at Billy, who shrugged. "I never stopped looking. I hardly blinked. He did it in slow motion. I could see it happen like those time-lapse movies when you see plants grow and flowers open, but I can't see how he did it. I say go with it." Rory nodded. Billy could see through lies, but he could also recognize truth. "What about you, Adima?" Adima nodded. "I agree, it's beautiful. It feels right." Rory felt his mind set questions aside like he left them on the shelf. He looked around and saw that the kiva, instead of being the dark place it was when they climbed down, was bright with the pulsing fibers of the web. Belecha said, "This is the world of light, the world of energy. It exists even when you are not open to seeing it. Your life is not set up to be aware. Too many distractions. There is another problem in your time. This is the world of energy now, in my time. It's pretty easy to tune into it. However, it's not like this in the time when you live. That's the trouble. That's why you were needed." "What do you mean?" asked Adima. "How can something like this change?" "The threads you see are the trails of energy that connect certain entities to their source. The entities are called Adima, or light weavers." He looked at Rory. "Guess what they do?" Rory said, "I see threads coming from you and from all of us." Belecha nodded. "I am Adima. All of you are Adima. It is as much a part of you as the color of your hair. Actually, more a part of you." James couldn't help it. He blurted out, "I see threads from your rattle and your drum, and—" "I know. I use the word entity because light weavers take many forms. Some are living, some are not. Trees, rocks, or other things that have been made, like my rattle, can be Adima. They all create, and when they create, they weave the web of light. You will learn more later. Now I want to show you what things look like in your time. Belecha began a slow chant, shaking his rattle at the web. As they watched, the threads moved in the sky as if waving in a breeze. However, the stars behind the threads moved like a fast-motion movies of the sun rising and setting. Time is skipping forward like a rock across a pond. You're seeing hundreds of years pass, explained Belecha. As they watched, the number of threads began to thin. Where the sky was once glowing with the sparkling waves, now there were only a few strands against the blackness. We slow even more now so you can see what is happening. Choose a thread and watch it closely. Rory picked a thread to watch. As he did, he saw a black dot appear on it, then several more. As he watched, the thread broke and the end waved randomly. Black dots appeared all over the remaining part of the thread, and soon it disappeared. I saw one dissolve, said Adima before Rory could speak. It didn't dissolve, said Belecha. What did you see? Black dots. First one, then more. The thread broke and dissolved. What you saw was the problem. Those weren't dots. Those were our other beings. We call them Kroledutz. They're energy suckers. Just like we create and spin light and energy, they feed on it. That's what attacked me last night? Asked Rory. That was a single one. There are now countless numbers of the creatures, replied Belecha. Why are there more now than in your time? Asked Adima. The Kroledutz helped create a stain on this world long ago. That gave them the power to spread like weeds. The Adima could not stop them, so most of us left. Left? Asked James. Yes, answered Belecha. We can follow the thread back to the spheres, the source, any time. When you know it's going to be cold and nasty for a while, sometimes the best thing to do is go inside and sit by the fire until spring. And you think it's spring now? Asked Adima. It's possible. Even if it's not, we have to force the issue. The Kroledutz are closing in for a final takeover of the world. If you four can't fix it quick, it won't matter if four more come later. There won't be a way in. Belecha turned to the four. You are the only hope, and you only have 4 weeks. They looked at each other, not sure if they believed this story and not enthusiastic to take on such a task. Belecha broke into their thoughts. Before you decide, you need to see the Kroledutz up close and personal. One more ride. I'll take you home. That's the end of chapter 3.